Part 1. The Boy Who Could Count. You're born in the dry season sometime around 620 AD, in a part of Palenque that the city's elite don't visit. Your father farms maize on a hillside plot passed down from his own father, and his father before that. The family has a house, a dog, and enough to eat in most years. That's not nothing. In this civilization, that's close to the median. You're not starving. You're not noble. You exist in the enormous middle of a world that barely acknowledges the middle exists. The nobles live on the high ground near the palace. The priests live near the temples. You live near the drainage ditch, and on most days, that is the full extent of your relationship with power. What you have, and what nobody around you knows what to do with, is a mind that won't stop counting things. You count the rows in your father's field and notice patterns in the spacing. You count the days between market visits and realize everything seems to cycle in 20s. Trading intervals, festivals, the rhythm of the village. 20 feels like a hinge the whole world turns on, and you are 9 years old and already pulling at the thread trying to find out why. You figure out around that same age that the morning star, the brilliant white light that rises before the sun, disappears and then comes back. Always. You start scratching marks in the dirt to track it. 8 days gone, 8 days gone, 8 days gone. Then it reappears in the evening sky, bright over the western horizon. Then it vanishes again, longer this time. Then it's back in the east, burning. You don't know yet that an entire framework of warfare and sacrifice has been built around this thing, that kings read its position before sending armies to die. You just know it keeps a schedule, and you want to know what that schedule is. A scribe named Abalam sees you in the market one morning, crouched in the dirt next to a corn stall, adding columns with a stick. He watches you for a long time without saying anything. You don't notice him. You're finishing a calculation. When you look up, he's there, and he asks, "What are you counting?" "The morning star," you say. "I think it comes back every 584 days, but I need more marks to be sure." Abalam is quiet for a moment. Then he tells you to come back tomorrow, early, before the heat. He has something to show you. He takes you to the observatory 6 days later. You are 11 years old, the son of a maize farmer, and your life has just changed completely, though it will take years before you understand exactly how. Part 2. The Observatory. The observatory isn't what you pictured. You pictured something like the Great Temples. Massive, open to the sky. What you get instead is a building that looks almost modest from the outside, set on a raised platform above the palace complex, with narrow windows cut at strange angles into thick stone walls. Those windows aren't decorative. Every single one is a sighting line, aligned to the rising of Venus, to the sun at the solstice, to the paths of specific stars. The building is a scientific instrument disguised as architecture, which is, you'll come to realize, a good description of almost everything in this city. 6 sky priests work here, men who've been recording the heavens from this building their whole lives, building on records left by the men before them. Their Venus tables go back nearly 400 years. Their eclipse records go back further. The oldest ones are copied in a hand so different from modern script that reading them is its own specialized skill. Abalam starts your training at the bottom, grinding pigment, fetching water, sharpening tools. But in the gaps, he teaches. You learn the 2 calendars the way you learn to walk. Slowly at first, then so naturally you forget there was ever a time you didn't know them. The solar calendar, 365 days split into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 leftover days at the end that everyone treats as cursed. Most people barely leave their houses during those 5 days, which, honestly, is not an unreasonable response to having days that the gods consider a scheduling error. And the ritual calendar, 260 days, built from a cycle of day names and numbers that mesh together like gears, producing combinations that won't repeat for the better part of a year. Both calendars run simultaneously, and a specific date in both only lines up once every 52 years. That 52-year alignment is a major event, the moment when the world could theoretically end if the gods decide not to renew it. Whole ceremonies exist around keeping that from happening. You learn to calculate this before you're 13. You also learn something much longer, a master count of days stretching back to a mythological starting point, a number so precise it can place any event in history to the exact day and reach millions of years in both directions. It is, without question, the most sophisticated timekeeping system in the world in 631 AD, and you are one of maybe 40 people alive who can fully read and write it. What takes longer to understand is what all of this is actually for. You arrive thinking you're learning science, and you are, genuinely rigorous science that can predict astronomical events centuries out. But science here doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to answer one question: what do the gods want? The king goes to war when Venus rises a certain way, because that moment belongs to the war god. Sacrifices are timed to eclipse windows. The date a new ruler takes power is chosen by sky priests to land on the most favorable alignment possible. The calendar doesn't just describe the universe. It tells the king when to act, and the king uses it accordingly. You understand this slowly, the way you understand most uncomfortable things, by watching and accumulating evidence until one day you're standing somewhere you can't go back from. Part 3. The First Lie. You're 24 when the king's envoy comes to the observatory. He is a court official whose whole job is to come to places like this and explain what the king intends, whether or not what the king intends lines up with reality. He's polite about it. That's what makes it worse. The king wants to launch a military campaign against the city of Tonina, 2 days' march to the east. The planned date is 40 days out. The problem is that Venus will be invisible at that time, passing between the Earth and Sun, a position the Maya associate with vulnerability and bad omens for war. Everyone in the court knows this. Fighting during the disappearance of the war star is the kind of thing that makes soldiers lose faith before the first spear is thrown. The envoy sits across from your senior, a weathered old sky priest who has been reading the sky from this room for 40 years, and explains the situation with the measured tone of a man who has delivered this particular message before. The Lord's planning has taken into account many factors, he says. It would be helpful if the record could reflect a date of Venus emergence slightly earlier than currently projected. Your senior doesn't blink. He nods once, slowly, and says he'll review the calculations. After the envoy leaves, the room is quiet for a long stretch, and then your senior looks over at you and says, simply, Venus cycles aren't always the same length. You know that's not true. You have the cycles pinned to within a fraction of a day across centuries of records. But you understand what he's telling you, and you are not going to say so. The adjusted record goes into the official book 4 days later. The king departs for Tonina on schedule. The campaign technically succeeds, barely, at significant cost, with enough losses that the victory monument uses unusually careful language, which in this culture is the equivalent of putting a very small trophy in a very large room. You stand on the temple platform and watch the soldiers come back through the city gate, and you count the stretchers. 37 dead, 112 wounded. You did math, and men died for it. You carry that for years before you find words for what it's made of. Part 4. The 20-year calculation. After Tonina, you spend 3 years doing nothing but eclipse prediction, and it turns out you are extraordinarily good at it. You can predict the next total lunar eclipse to within 40 minutes, 14 years out. You know this because you do it, write it in stone, and then wait. And the eclipse arrives right on time, indifferent to whether anyone is impressed. You refine the method after that. By your 40s, the other sky priests in the city are calling you first when anything unusual happens in the sky, which is the closest thing to professional respect this job offers. The king, a new one, the old one's son, holds ceremonies in your honor. You're given a larger workspace, more scribes, more access to the oldest records. You start exchanging correspondence with sky priests in other cities, comparing tables, arguing over calculations in the careful coded language that scholars use when they need to be precise and also need to be understood only by each other. It's the closest thing to a scientific community that exists in the world you live in. And for a while, not always, but for stretches of years, it's enough to make you feel that the work matters for its own sake. Then the king's son comes of age, and everything you've built becomes a tool. The boy is 16. He needs a public demonstration of divine favor before his eventual accession, something that proves the gods have chosen him. The court lands on the lunar eclipse you've predicted, the largest in your tables, a total eclipse visible at maximum height over Palenque at the precise hour of a major ceremony. The plan is straightforward. The sky goes dark on command, the prince performs the ritual at the peak of totality. The priests announce that the gods themselves have confirmed his mandate. It is, from a political engineering standpoint, quite elegant. It is also only possible because you told them exactly when the sky would go dark, to the hour, 3 years in advance. You understand the role you're playing in this. You've understood it since Tonina. What's being sacrificed is a captive held in the city for 3 months, fed well, and treated with a specific ritualized care that is, if you think about it too hard, one of the more disturbing forms of hospitality ever practiced. You try not to think about it too hard. Part 5. The night of the eclipse. The night arrives warm and dry, with perfect visibility. You had noted the seasonal weather patterns in your preliminary report and told the court conditions would be ideal, so they scheduled the ceremony partly based on your forecast. That is one more thread you are holding. You're at the top of the temple when the shadow begins, 90 steps above the crowd, the king standing directly behind you. Below, 15,000 people pack the plazas in torchlight, and as the shadow starts crossing the moon's lower edge, the noise from down there shifts. Less celebration, more the particular pitch of people who are genuinely frightened and trying to decide how frightened to be. You watch the geometry unfold the way you've watched it a dozen times in smaller eclipses. The outer shadow first, just a slight dimming that most people wouldn't notice. Then the dark core of the shadow arriving and eating across the face of the moon with the same unhurried mechanical precision it has kept since long before anyone was alive to measure it. The crowd gets louder as it gets darker. The priests below start shaking their rattles and chanting, performing their half of the ceremony, the half that is for the audience. At totality, the moon goes red-orange, the color of embers, and the obsidian blade goes up and you look away. Not because you haven't seen violence before, because it is the one choice in this entire night that is still yours to make. The crowd goes silent at totality. Not the rattling, fearful silence of a moment ago, but something that tips just briefly into awe. The kind that happens when something is too large and too strange for any reaction to quite fit it. 15,000 people, all at once, just looking. And then the ritual is done, and the chanting starts again, and the king leans forward and says, "The gods have spoken." You stand there on the temple platform and feel the full distance between what you know and what you're allowed to say. The eclipse doesn't care about the ceremony. It doesn't care about the prince or the sacrifice or any of it. It's doing what gravity and orbits have always made it do. What your tables said it would do. What it will do again in 18 years and 11 days whether this city still exists or not. It's the loneliest you've ever been in your life. Part 6. What you leave behind. You live to 58, which is genuinely old. Most people you came up with are dead. In your final decade, after the king who staged the eclipse dies of fever, and his son takes the throne and the court's attention drifts to younger sky priests, ones more willing to adjust their numbers quickly and without the long, uncomfortable pauses you've become known for. You do the most important work of your life, and you do it in secret. You make a second record, not the official one, not the court version with its politically adjusted Venus dates and its strategically framed eclipse windows. The other one, the real one. Raw tables, uncorrected. Eclipse predictions, stripped of ceremony. Venus cycles followed honestly wherever they lead, including into dates the king would find inconvenient. Just the numbers. And what the numbers actually mean. It takes 7 years. You write it on bark paper, 4 folded panels sealed with rubber and wrapped in cotton cloth, and you give it to a junior scribe you've trained for 12 years. The sharpest mind you've worked with since Abalam found you in that market 4 decades ago. You tell her to bury it somewhere unremarkable. Not the observatory, not the temple, a storeroom floor, a courtyard corner. Somewhere it won't be found until the city is old enough that nobody has any use for suppressing it. She asks why you didn't just destroy the official record if it was wrong. You tell her destroying it wouldn't change what the king did with it. But if the real one survives, then someday, long after the king, long after the prince, long after you, someone will be able to see what the sky was actually doing, instead of what power said it was doing. Those are not the same thing. And you've spent your whole life knowing the difference while pretending otherwise, and you are tired of pretending. She buries it the same week you die. The official record marks your death in 4 glyphs. Your name, your title, the date, nothing else. That's standard. The city of Palanque will be abandoned within 150 years, swallowed by jungle as the civilization collapses under drought and warfare and fragmentation that no sky priest predicted, because some things don't leave traces in the sky. The storeroom fills with rubble. The rubble is covered by roots. The roots are covered by centuries. Somewhere under all of that, if the rubber held and the bark survived the damp, the real numbers are still there. What the sky actually did, written down by a farmer's son who spent his whole life in the space between truth and what the king needed truth to be. The jungle has been giving pieces of this city back for 100 years and still isn't done. There are rooms not yet opened, records not yet read. Archaeologists have found sealed vessels in storage floors before. Pigment jars, offerings, objects wrapped in cloth and placed with deliberate care, as if whoever left them understood that the people coming to find them would be strangers from a future too far away to imagine. It's entirely possible that somewhere in what remains of Palanque, a folded stack of bark paper is waiting, sealed in rubber, for someone with enough patience to find it. The Mayan astronomical records that survived, mainly in a document called the Dresden Codex, which is exactly as dramatic a name as it sounds, and which currently sits in a library in Germany, are accurate to a degree that still gets cited in academic literature. The Venus tables track the planet's cycle with an error of roughly 2 hours across 5 centuries of prediction. The eclipse records embed a correction factor so precise that modern researchers have spent decades trying to work out how it was calculated, because there's no instrument in the archaeological record that should be capable of producing it. What there is centuries of patient observation, and a mathematical tradition sophisticated enough to do something meaningful with what those observations produced. That tradition existed entirely inside a society organized around sacrifice and divine kingship, where the same calculation that told you when the next eclipse would arrive also told the king when to go to war and when to kill someone to confirm a teenager's right to rule. The people who built those tables almost certainly understood the difference between what the sky does and what they were being asked to say the sky means. How they lived inside that gap, what they kept, what they changed, what they buried. The stones don't tell you. This story is fiction. The history isn't. Palenque was real. The observatory was real. The Dresden Codex is real. And you can find images of it online right now. And the Venus tables are right there in the first few pages. And they are genuinely beautiful. And they were written by someone who was very, very good at their job. The civilization that produced them collapsed around 900 AD. Nobody knows exactly why, and the more they dig, the more complicated it gets. The jungle is still giving it back, one room at a time. If this one made you think, drop a comment below. Subscribe for more. See you in the next one.